All right, what's going on, everybody? This is Brendan back again with another video, and today we're going to be breaking down the color grade for Neuway Media's first original short film, Sluggo. If you haven't seen Sluggo, a link to it will be in the description. Like I said, it's our first official original short film, so we shot this a little over a year ago now, and it was just finally released about a month ago. I've been meaning to upload this video to talk about the color grade for a while, finally getting to it. So it's a really fun comedy short film about a baseball game. It's exactly 5 minutes long, so it's short, it's funny, it's entertaining. Highly recommend you go check it out. It was written and directed by one of our good friends, John Plester, shot by myself and Chris. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk about the color grading process of this. If you want any other color grading tutorials, my personal YouTube page, @BrendanGrant, a link will be in the description. I have a handful of other color grading tutorials using this exact same approach. I basically do all of my color grade within Premiere. So DaVinci Resolve is a very powerful color grading program. However, the Lumetri color effect right within Adobe Premiere CC has been updated over the years, and it's become more and more powerful, and it's at a point now where you can have a lot of control over the color just straight in Premiere. Makes my personal workflow a little bit easier. Today, and basically with all my work I do, it's all red footage, so we're color grading red footage here in case that's something that interests you. But yeah, so without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to be talking about basically how I achieved this color grade using the Lumetri color effect within Premiere. So let's find a good clip here to use. I kind of like this clip. I want like a good example here. Okay, here we go. This is a perfect example clip. We've got some nice highlights here. We've got varying shades of green and reds and skin tones, and even some yellow in here. So we're basically looking at the whole color palette of the movie in this one frame, and a pretty large contrast. So we'll use this frame to show exactly what's happening with the color. So this is color graded, and here's what it looks like not color graded. So as you can see, it's a humongous difference. Initially, while you're looking at the color graded image, it doesn't stand out as something that's super extreme. It definitely has a lot of character, and it's very unique, and it's a very distinct look. But when you see it side by side with the uncolor graded version, it's kind of like mind-blowing what a difference it is. So I really wanted to go for something that had a much more distinct, unique look. And so if you look at the before and after again, you'll see it shifts very green. The highlights are a little bit yellow. You can't quite tell from this image, but the greens and blues are pushed a little bit more teal and saturated, whereas the rest of the image is a little bit desaturated. So first, I started from one of my favorite LUTs, which is the Ladybird LUT from Lutify Me. One of my good friends, Lucas, if you're watching this, shout out to you. He sent me a whole bunch of Lutify Me LUTs, and I went through basically all of them, and the Ladybird LUT is definitely one of my favorites. I use it quite a lot. So I started with the Ladybird LUT, and then went from there. I was going for something that looked a little bit more filmic, a little bit more old school and cinematic, and something, I wasn't really going for a bright, saturated, poppy kind of aesthetic. I was going for something that felt a little bit more organic and a little bit maybe even washed out. So I'm going to turn off this Lumetri color effect. So we're starting from scratch here. This is the bare bones color corrected image, and now I'm just going to go and apply a new Lumetri color effect, and we're basically going to replicate exactly what I did. So I'll search Lumetri color down here, click and drag it onto my adjustment layer, and it pops up right over here. So as you can see, we have a bunch of different tabs here. We have basic correction, creative, curves, color wheels, HSL, and vignette. So we're gonna go through each of these tabs, and I'm gonna tell you the exact settings basically that I used for this video. We're gonna go in the creative tab first, and I'm gonna apply the LUT. So where it says look here, and there's a drop-down menu, if you hit browse, then you can search for all of your own LUTs, and here is my Lutify Me Ladybird LUT. I'm going to open that up, and you can see immediately the Ladybird LUT applies to this image. As you can see though, the Ladybird LUT alone looks a lot different than my final result, which is this. So we're not quite there yet, but that's our start. So we're gonna go back to our new effect. We're gonna change this quite a bit. So we're gonna stick in the creative tab real quick. We're gonna go to saturation, and I'm gonna drop that down to 80%. Overall, the whole image is desaturated, but now it makes the reds a little bit more tame. So I like that. That's all we're gonna do in the creative tab. Now we'll go back up to basic correction. In basic correction, I wanted to adjust the temperature and the tint of the image. So for my temperature and tint, I actually wanted to warm it up a little bit, but mainly I wanted to change the tint. I wanted it to feel a lot more green. So for temperature, we're gonna go to 22. That's gonna warm the image up even more, give it that sort of old school magic hour sort of a look, even though, as you can tell, it was overcast basically the entire time we were filming. I wanted it to feel a little bit more like it was sunny out, even though there were a lot of clouds. And for tint, we're gonna go to -9, and you'll see here that it pulls a little bit more of the magenta out of it and makes everything a little bit more green. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference. So let's take a look at before and after now. As you can see, we've got that LUT applied, it's a little desaturated, and it's a little warmer and a little more green. That's what we've done so far. All right, next up, we're gonna go into curves. We're gonna go to Lumiverse saturation. So this is basically adjusting the saturation of the different brightness levels of the image. So you can make the shadows more or less saturated, the midtones more or less saturated, the highlights more or less saturated. So this is a little trick that I sometimes like to do on my color grades where I just drop the saturation of the shadows a little bit. It allows me to keep the shadows more of that pure neutral black color instead of shifting a little bit tinted according to all the other adjustments I made. So this allows me to still make adjustments and not worry as much about my shadows not looking white balanced. So I'm basically gonna select about here, and I'm gonna drop this point down for the shadows, about 2 of these grid points. Not too much. This is a very subtle effect, but it's gonna help us overall make a slightly higher quality looking color grade. It's a little trick I like to do. I don't do it all the time, but when I'm doing something like a really extreme grade like this, sometimes it's something I consider. So that's all we're gonna do in the Curves tab. I can close that out. Now we'll go to the Color Wheels tab. For the color wheels, this is where we can isolate shadows, midtones, and highlights, and change the tint. So I'm not gonna change the shadows because I already tried to bring those back to a pure neutral black color, but I am gonna change the midtones and the highlights. So for the midtones, I'm basically gonna shift all the midtones a little bit tealish. And I'm gonna bring this crosshair down just a little bit. Not too much. With these color wheels, you wanna make sure that you're doing very subtle adjustments. Color wheels, and really everything with color grading, you wanna just do little increments because you can very quickly do way too much and go way overboard with your color. Just little changes here and there can go a long way. So I only need to bring down this crosshair from the center just a little bit in order to change quite a bit. For the highlights, I'm actually gonna warm the highlights up even more because I really wanna give it that sort of vintage, old school kind of a feel. So I'm gonna bring the highlights up towards the yellow end. And again, I'm not gonna bring this too far, but it is relatively far. So let's take a look at a before and after of this. So I can click the active check mark to turn this on and off. So this is just the curves before, this is just the color wheels before here and after here. So as you can see, the midtones they really have that sort of teal greenish feel now, and the highlights are even warmer. So moving right along. Now we're gonna go to the most fun part for me always, which is the HSL tool. This is the most powerful tool in Lumetri Color. And for here, I wanna select the blues and greens, and I wanna make them even more teal and even more saturated. Because when I brought the saturation down initially in the basic correction tab, really that was because the reds were really sort of way too saturated for me with the Ladybird LUT applied. So I wanted to bring the reds down a little bit, and washing out the skin tones also gives it that sort of vintage feel, but I don't want the rest of the color to have that same sort of a desaturated feel. I want to have a little bit more saturation in the greens especially because there's grass in the field and trees in the background, and I want to give them a little bit more life again. And I always tend, one of my favorite things to do is have that sort of teal-orange approach with color grading, which is basically just the simple concept that skin tones tend to be in the orange category, and the opposite of orange is teal. And so if you can have a color grade that uniformly is mostly teals and oranges, then you have a lot of contrast and separation between your skin tones, your characters, and the rest of the space. So I'm going to select the blues to the greens, and I'm going to feather that out a little bit. Maybe feather it a little bit more. For the saturation, I'm going to mainly pick up the low to mid-high saturation level, and then I'll feather that out as well. And then mainly I'm going to pick up the low luma level. So that's my isolation for the colors that I'm affecting. And if I turn on show mask, you can see all the stuff that's dark here. That's all the colors that I'm actually selecting by using hue, saturation, and luma. So now that we have our colors selected, now we can transform them. So we're gonna make two transformations here. One is we're gonna pull them a little bit towards teal. So I'm just gonna grab this color wheel, bring it down towards teal a bit, and then we're gonna increase the saturation of that to bring a little bit more life back into it. So I'm gonna bring the saturation all the way up to 120, and you can see that makes quite a big difference. So if I turn the show mask off, that's basically our final look. I also wanted to go in here to vignette and add a little bit of a vignette to it as well. Again, I was going for that sort of old school vibe, so adding a little bit of vignette gives it a little bit more character. And this is quite an extreme, pronounced color grade here, so I just wanted to pretty much go all out and go crazy with it. So for our settings for the vignette, we're gonna go to just minus 0.4 for the amount. It's not a large number, but as you can see, when I click it on and off, you can see it does quite a bit to darken the edges of the frame. For the midpoint, we're gonna go to about 65 from 50. So we're expanding the midpoint out a little bit, so it's not quite as much coming into the center of the frame. For roundness, which is the actual shape of the vignette itself, we're gonna go to about 30, which keeps it from being too ovular, so we're kind of rounding it out. And then for feather, I'm gonna feather it to about 77 instead of 50. So it does a little bit, not too much there, but that makes it a little bit more subtle. So if we turn this off and on, that's before, that's after. So you can see it just darkens up the edge of the frame a little bit. It's feathered nicely and it's not too intense, so you won't really notice any stepping. You won't actually see the edge of the vignette. It's just a really nice fall off, darkening the edges of the frame a little bit. Adds a little bit more character, makes it feel even a little bit more old school and filmic. So that's the final look. That's how we achieved this sort of greenish, teal and orange, desaturated, low contrast sort of approach to create sort of an old school organic filmic vibe using the Ladybird LUT from Lutify Me. So hope you guys enjoyed that color grade. Hopefully it enlightened you a little bit about our color grading process here at Neuway Media. And yeah, this project was a whole lot of fun. I highly recommend you go check it out, give it a watch. Again, link to Sluggo will be in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.